everybody, and welcome on in to another episode of our Kistler O'Brien National Fire Prevention Week podcast. I'm Tyler Trumbauer with Kistler O'Brien Fire Protection. We thank you all for tuning in for another great episode as we have each one debuting a new episode each day here to celebrate National Fire Prevention Week. If you've missed any of our episodes, you can go to our YouTube channel, Kistler O'Brien Fire Protection, to check them all out as we have a different guest each and every day giving us their point of view on their role and what they do to help promote fire and life safety here in the greater Lehigh Valley area. And today we got a good one for you. We are honored to be joined by the fire chief of the Greenawalds Fire Rescue in South Whitehall Township, Andrew Garger. Andrew, thank you for joining us today, and we really appreciate you giving us a few minutes of your time.
Absolutely. Thank you for having me.
Certainly, and I got a lot of great questions for you. We've had a lot of good guests this week, and they're kind of, variety of roles, variety of different, capacities that they work in fire and life safety, and you being on the front lines really is going to be a great one for us here and for our audience. So I kind of want to start off with the main reason why we are here, and that's National Fire Prevention Week. So in your eyes, as someone that, has been in fire and life safety for years now and have worked your way up to this fire chief role, what does this week mean for you and maybe for your rescue company?
Sure. So it's always an important week. This is normally the time of year that we kick off fire safety education in our schools and daycares in the area. It's a time of year that everybody's really thinking about fire safety, which is something that we should be thinking about all year round. But it's nice to have a week set aside where everybody's talking about it, and especially as we start to move indoors as the weather changes, a lot more potential for fire emergencies. So it's a very, very important week for us to get our message out there about fire safety and fire prevention.
Certainly, and something that you guys do the other 51 weeks of the year, but really put a focal point on it here in this first week of October, as you mentioned, kind of changing into that autumn season as well. So as we mentioned, your role is the fire chief of the Greenwalds Fire Rescue in South Whitehall Township. Can you kind of let us know, a little bit about your time being there and kind of, has this always been an aspiration of yours to kind of work your way up to a fire chief role and kind of maybe even take us back to the beginnings of what inspired you to become a volunteer firefighter before even climbing that proverbial ladder, if you will, to get to the chief role?
Sure. Yeah, it's something that's been a big part of my life for most of my life now. I started out as a junior firefighter when I was 15 years old. The fire department was always a big part of the community that I grew up in. So as I got a little bit older, I knew a lot of the kids that I grew up with. Their parents volunteered at the fire department. As we started getting older, some of our friends started to get involved, and that's when I got involved, when I was old enough to become a junior member. So it's kind of like an explorer program, kind of learn a little bit about the fire service and what it entails, and that's when I really got into it, and it was just became a huge part of my life. So from then on, I was hooked, and that's been a passion of mine for going on 22 years now. So got a lot of great experiences, made a lot of great friends through the fire service, got to help a lot of people along the way, and here we are today.
Yeah, and let me say, first and foremost, thank you for your decades of service and those years that you will continue to give. Truly some of the unsung heroes we have in the Lehigh Valley, with so many volunteer firefighters, and all those companies across the country as well, volunteering their time and their efforts. And folks, I don't think truly realize how much time goes into it, not just when you get an emergency call, but that downtime at the station as well to prepare, and then all the things you do in the community as well, like you talked about earlier in this episode. So thank you for that as well. Kind of going a little bit off script there, you talked about how young you started at 15 years old and how you were motivated to get into that junior program and start out. What would you kind of say to anybody who may be in that same age group, maybe a little bit older, maybe more 18, 19, but are starting to think about the idea of joining their local volunteer fire company and at least maybe in some capacity helping out, what would your message be to them to try to maybe get that foot in the door and maybe even test the waters a little bit if they're uncertain about, putting 2 feet in?
Sure, absolutely. That's the biggest part, taking the first step to go knock on the door at your local firehouse and check it out. I think most volunteer fire departments certainly are welcoming of new members, new people who are interested in what we do and being able to help the community. So knock on the door, go inside, see what's going on. We're always more than willing to show you around the firehouse, let you know a little bit more about what we do and the services we provide. Biggest thing is just taking that first step. If you're interested at all, go check it out. There's a lot of opportunities out there to advance yourself through the fire service, and a lot of different directions that can take you. So take that first step, go in and check it out, and see where that leads.
And in my experience, the volunteer firefighters are probably some of the nicest people that you will meet as well. So they'll make that transition and that initial first step one of the easiest that you will make in your life. And they are some of the most welcoming individuals out there. So just something I kind of wanted to get out there as well for those individuals. Maybe it doesn't have to be at the Greenawalds, but just at any of their local fire company as well. So let's talk a little bit about your service and what you're experiencing out there on the front lines. So your team, your crews, how many of the fire calls that you guys receive, that you respond to, do you think could have been avoided if there was more education about fire safety and prevention and just kind of more of a higher baseline knowledge for individuals? If they had that, how much could have been avoided, do you think, that you encounter on a daily and weekly basis?
I think quite a few of our calls, could have been things that could have been avoided or minimized. Probably one of the biggest things we respond to is cooking incidents. Many of our fire alarms are due to mishaps in the kitchen, unattended cooking. So that's probably one of the biggest ones that's avoidable. We understand that there's a lot of distractions nowadays, but it's really important to pay attention to what's going on in the kitchen, and you can avoid those types of emergencies. Some of the other ones we see are outside the kitchen, also cooking related. A lot of emergencies with grills, generators, not using the right size extension cords, things like that can all be avoided with a little bit of education or maybe refamiliarization with proper safety procedures, things around your house.
And that's why this week, National Fire Prevention Week, means so much to you, to all the volunteer firefighters, and of course us here at Kistler O'Brien Fire Protection as well, just trying to promote fire and life safety overall. And you talked about maybe one thing changing is the changing of the seasons, folks inside more, and how that can affect maybe volume of calls and type of calls. But how has the coronavirus pandemic affected, maybe the volume of calls, the type of calls, and overall kind of how your crew operates as well? This is something that I'm addressing with all of our guests, because I feel like no matter whatever line of work you're in, the COVID-19 has impacted it some way, shape, fashion, or form. So kind of how has you and your team adjusted, and what have you guys experienced on the front lines since the coronavirus pandemic really came to the forefront in March?
Sure. I think back in March, April, we certainly saw a pretty significant decrease in the number of calls we were going out on. Everybody was kind of staying at home and not doing anything too risky. Since that time, though, I think that there's been a lot of positive changes as well. Certainly, we've had to adapt to the environment that we're going out into right now, changes to personal protective equipment, and just more of an awareness of what's going on around us, and some new safety procedures to keep our members safe and the people who we're responding to safe. But I think historically the fire service has always had to adapt to new challenges and new missions, and our scope of practice is always increasing. So it was something that we were able to adapt to pretty readily.
Great to hear, and glad to hear that. And once again, I talked about your service, but also just being able to continue to do your jobs and fight, through the pandemic, especially during its early onset months, March, April, and May. And really appreciate that as well for you and your entire team. So you talked a little bit early on about the community outreach you guys do, especially surrounding this National Fire Prevention Week and getting into the schools and traditionally and going out to, more events when the pandemic loosens and we can have more of a community outreach efforts. What are some of the best fire prevention tips that you guys traditionally give out, knowing that, and maybe even more so knowing that people are home now more than ever, so that, they're maybe cooking at home more and they're at home doing different at-home projects and using different, like you said, extension cords or items that may get them into a tough situation that may result in a fire emergency. But maybe what are some of those top tips you give, and maybe more specific ones now that we as a society are spending more time at home?
Sure. I think first and foremost, at the top of our list is always our message to make sure you have working smoke detectors, working carbon monoxide detectors, checking the batteries, especially now we're coming up on a time change. That's a good reminder to check the batteries, replace the batteries in your smoke detectors. That's always one of the top messages that we're trying to put out. Again, back to the cooking incidents. People right now are staying home and cooking much more frequently than they used to, when we used to more freely go out to restaurants for our meals. So, being attentive in the kitchen, having a plan to be able to stop a fire or get out of your house safely if you do have a fire is a big key as well.
Absolutely. And something that everyone, I think, is starting to realize how much you need to protect your home and do different things, especially now that so many of your family members are spending time at home in overall. And those are some great ones to think of, especially with daylight savings time coming up as well, the most general one with or without a pandemic to keep in mind as well, with the operational smoke detectors and checking your batteries as well. So speaking of homeowners and folks at home, is there anything that they can do to better help you and your team if you guys need to respond to their location in the event of a fire emergency? Or is there things that they can do? Is there tools or something that they can have or safeguards in place that when you and your crew get on scene could better help you and better keep them safe in that small time frame between when you guys get the call and when you arrive on scene?
Sure, absolutely. I think the biggest thing you can do to help is again, have a plan for what you're going to do in the event of an emergency. Early notification is also a big one. Don't wait to call the fire department. If you have an emergency or the potential that something can get out of hand, don't be afraid to call 911 as soon as possible. The quicker you make that call, the quicker we can respond and hopefully contain whatever your emergency is to a much smaller area and minimize the losses. Some other things you can do is, have fire extinguishers handy in accessible locations in your house, and make sure everybody knows how to use them and how to safely put out a fire. Again, don't delay calling 911, but if you have the ability to quickly put the fire out, certainly do so.
Certainly, and great tips as well. And is in the event of a fire emergency, so you guys have come, you're on scene. How common, at least it seems this happens a lot, maybe if you can debunk that or confirm this, that people often want to go back inside. They immediately react and get outside if there is a fire inside their house, but then they start to maybe take an inventory and go, where the pets, valuable items, other items that they feel they need to go back inside to get. Is that something that you encounter often? And if so, how many times do you think that resulted in someone sustaining an injury, maybe a burn or not, but just an injury going back into a structure that is on fire, that could have been avoided if they just stayed out, waited for you guys to potentially go in and rescue a pet or another loved one, or just didn't go in at all, those individuals? Is that something you see often? And if so, how detrimental is that to someone that does take that risk and go back in?
Sure. Unfortunately, it is something that we do see often. We certainly understand the emotional response to having a fire in your home and the potential loss of something that's valuable to you, or something that has a lot of sentimental value, especially if it's a pet or another family member. Um, the biggest advice that we try to give is, if you get out, stay out. Um, Make sure, again, that you have a plan and that everybody knows what the plan is for how to evacuate themselves from the home. So you can trust that if there's an emergency, everybody's on the same page. Everybody has a meeting place outside and a way to get themselves out of harm's way there. And it's something important to practice. You know, people don't typically rise to the occasion when an emergency occurs. We fall back on our level of comfort, our level of training. So, again, try to stay outside. If you do get out safely, we know there's a huge temptation to try to go back in there and save what you can. But tragically, a lot of times that does result in significant injury and unfortunately fatalities as well, when people try to go back in to collect belongings, rescue pets, or even try to extinguish the fire on their own. It's a very hostile environment when a house is on fire. There's a lot of chemicals, carbon monoxide, hydrogen cyanide, among tons of other chemicals that are in the superheated air. And most people don't realize just one or two breaths of that, and you'll be unconscious, and then you're not able to help anybody. So if you do get out, stay out. If it's not safe to go back in to make a rescue, direct the fire department to where you think somebody or something might be, and we have the tools to get in there a little more quickly and hopefully rescue whatever needs to be rescued.
Certainly, yeah, and just a great succinct way, like you said, if you get out, stay out, and let the the professionals, you guys with the better equipment and more high level training, be able to get in and see if it's a situation that you can go perform a rescue and just overall assess the situation and the fire for what it currently is at the moment. So we mentioned, obviously, Andrew, you are the fire chief of the Greenawalds Fire Rescue in South Whitehall Township. Talked about the coronavirus pandemic a little bit earlier. Kind of to conclude our conversation here, kind of just shed some light on how your fire rescue team is handling it, how the company's doing overall, if there's anything you guys need or you have a shortage of at the moment that maybe your local neighbors that you service could potentially help with. I know a lot of the companies rely on fundraisers and different events to try to raise funds, and a lot of that can't happen due to gathering limits and folks trying to social distance. So kind of, if you could just give us an update status on where you're at and what maybe you guys could benefit from moving forward as we continue to still see social distancing and gathering limits be a mainstay of our society currently, and probably for the near future as well.
Sure. I think overall, Greenawalds, all the departments in South Whitehall Township, all the fire departments in South Whitehall Township, overall, we're doing very well. We're very fortunate to have a lot of great support from our township and our residents. We're doing well with the PPE we need. I alluded to it earlier. I think in some respects, this pandemic has been good for the volunteer fire service. I think there's a lot of great benefits to working together as a team to overcome a challenge, and builds a lot of cohesion on that team, and really gets everybody working together towards a common goal. So we're very blessed in that respect. We're doing very well. I know there are a lot of volunteer fire departments out there that do rely much more heavily than we do on fundraising efforts, and a lot of the events that they normally host have been canceled because of the pandemic. So if you do live in an area where you have that situation and the departments are relying on the support of their community to survive, please reach out to them and help in any way that you can.
Great message right there at the end, Andrew. We appreciate it. And good news as well to end on, at least about Greenawalds Fire Rescue and how you and all of your neighboring companies are handling it in South Whitehall Township. So once again, ladies and gentlemen, that's Andrew Garger, the fire chief of the Greenawalds Fire Rescue in South Whitehall Township, joining us here on another episode of the Kistler O'Brien National Fire Prevention Week video podcast series. Andrew, I appreciate your time today. Thank you for your insight, your tips, and your knowledge on fire and life safety. Once again, thank you for your service to your community in the Lehigh Valley. And, best of luck moving forward and safety to you and your team fighting on the front lines to keep everyone safe here in the area.
Thank you very much for having me, Tyler.
Thank you. And thank you to everyone tuning in and watching this episode. We really appreciate you. Once again, you can check all of our episodes out from this week's video podcast series on our YouTube channel and our social media accounts as well. You can check us out on YouTube at Kistler O'Brien Fire Protection and view us online on our website as well at www.kobfire.com. And we'll see you next time for another episode of our podcast series. Talk to you then.